Yeah, it's quite something to be busy and frantic, you know? And I find myself sometimes as well when it's just like it's one thing onto the next. And then you have like this rapid, what's the word, task switching. So
Mm,
like your brain is constantly just darting between different small things all the time. And
yeah.
it's really like, you know, when your laptop slows down because it starts running out of space and then it
Yep.
doesn't function as properly, tabs don't open when you want them to open. That's like really that happens to my brain. And it's just such a, it's true. And then so you have these days when you just like, you don't know where you're coming or going. And then when you
That is
finally
so
get
true.
to
You
that
feel like
space when
you feel your brain is buffering.
exactly, you're just buffering all the time. It's like you're watching that little wheel turn around and around and around, waiting for the next sentence to come out, and try to articulate it as best you possibly can, which is why you're here today.
Yes.
We're here to talk about communication, and we're here to talk about what it means to be tactful. So, I mean, you've used that word successfully in your website, tactfully. How important is it that we are tactful in our communication?
That's a really good question. I mean, the fact that we have to live and breathe with other human beings just means that we have to master the art of communication. So it's not enough to just be able to communicate normally every single day, through listening, nonverbal communication or verbal communication. But because you're dealing with humans who have their own set of emotions, you have your own set of emotions. You have to be able to communicate in a way that's empathetic, that is filled with emotional intelligence. You've got to read things that haven't been said in order to get your message across. So that's why it's important, because you're not just dealing with just animals. You're dealing with humans who have a set of emotions. And so tactful communication is important for that reason.
Yeah, and I'm sure tactful communication is a great opportunity to maneuver a situation to your advantage, right? Or to mitigate doing damage control, for example, in a situation that is unfavorable. So how can it be to our advantage that we are able to use tact successfully?
So, when it comes to tactful communication, there is a sort of, how can I put this? Some sort of influence that you can have to make a decision go your way. I know some people might say, well, that's manipulation, but actually, not really. When it comes to things like damage control, when it comes to crisis communication, you need to communicate with diplomacy. So, communicate in such a way that you have taken into account what people have said, how they feel, and in your communication, it's seen and heard that you have understood how people feel. Doesn't necessarily mean you'll agree with them, but tactful communication there's an ability to sway people to whatever favorable outcome you want to have. And I'm not necessarily talking about manipulation. I'm talking about, for example, if within an organization there's been a crisis and the leader in that organization needs to communicate that something has happened, but needs to communicate it in a way that helps the organizational people within it to feel calm, to feel that they're being led. And so, if you have the ability to take into account everybody's feelings, their fears, their concerns, and address those in the way that you communicate, then you win people over. People trust you better. So I think that's how tactful communication really plays a role in having a favorable outcome or getting people to sway towards your direction.
Yeah. So there's two things there when you're thinking about when you mention crisis control. Do you remember that Coldplay concert, that infamous Coldplay concert with the dude that was caught having an affair and
Yes.
of that big company in America? And
Mm.
I mean, it just went bananas, the whole internet. I mean, just globally. And I felt so sorry for that guy's kids and wife. But the kids are the ones that get caught in the crossfire in a big way. But take that and park that to one side. I read his statement that he issued afterwards. It took him a couple of days to issue a proper statement. an official statement. And I was like, I read this thing and I was flabbergasted because he spoke about how it's wrong and this and this and this. And then at the end, he finishes with, but by the way, he just finds it so appalling that the amount of abuse that he's received and the amount of hate that he's received online, and like flips the whole thing at the end. And I'm just like, buddy, you should have stopped 3 sentences ago. Like, nobody
Right?
cares. No, yeah, nobody cares. You're just digging yourself a deeper hole. Like, you've literally just
Mm.
been caught out having an affair with one of your directors or one of your colleagues as a CEO of a massive company. And then you want to turn around and put it on us to be like, hey, you guys, you mustn't have a go at me. Eh? And I'm just like, flip, bro. Like, whoever advised that on that statement, or if he did it on his
Terrible.
own, he needs to speak to you. He would have come up with something a lot better than that.
You
So
know,
you're so right, though,
and
because
I'm so glad that you actually brought that up. Because sorry to cut you, because my mind was just racing as you were talking about that, and it made me think of how um, there is also value in, yes, listening to your team to help you put a statement out, but there's also value in knowing when to keep quiet when you've gone a bit too far and you need to just. Now you're saying too much. You involving us. We don't actually need to be involved in this. Just say what you need to and keep quiet at some point.
exactly, because the reality is the backlash in today's age with technology, with social media, we are all content creators. I listened to another show the other day and they were talking about how previously you had like 4 or 5 people in your country or in your province that were presenters. It was the weatherman, it was the sports presenter, and it was the 2 news anchors. Those were the people that would address the rest of us. And now everybody is a presenter. I'm presenting in this form in the podcast. You present when you communicate and when you deliver your a TEDx talk like you've done in the past. And we have to, even more so than ever, we need to be able to master the art of communication, or at least show enough of an awareness to invest in developing that skill further, because it's never been more valuable. Previously, we didn't need that. We could be the person that didn't say much at the office, collected our paycheck at the end of every month, and then carried on with our lives. With the advancement of AI and so on, it has never been more of an advantage to communicate yourself in an authentic manner to help engage yourself with other people. What do you think about that?
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was just thinking about how, as you said, has become a content creator. You have more people that have a platform, which is great because that just means freedom of speech. We get to say how we feel and talk on topics that we're passionate about. But also with that comes a sense of responsibility because if everybody's talking, who's listening, And there is a responsibility on all of us as humans, whether you have a platform to speak or not, there's a responsibility to listen. So, yes, while we can come into work, we don't really have to talk to everybody. We're just there to, do our work, put our head down and leave. But there's still a responsibility to listen, which is a form of communication that not all of us really take seriously or we don't really do well, and you can see that playing out in a whole lot of fights or disagreements or just the different programs that we're seeing on TV. I think of like the Majanga Commission or the ad hoc committee, where they are addressing and bringing up really important issues in the nation of corruption within the South African police service. But sometimes you look at the way, or you listen to the way people answer questions, and you can tell that there's no listening involved here. Someone is asking
Mm,
what, but you're answering why. Somebody's asking where, but you're answering who. And just that is a big indication of the miscommunication that happens on a daily basis in every conversation because we just don't want to listen or we don't know how to listen, but everybody wants to be heard. So I think that's really been something that I've been picking up quite a lot, that where communication is failing every single day, whether you have a platform or you don't, whether you're just communicating with a friend, we just don't know how to listen well. And that I think is the one part of communication that needs a lot of effort.
yeah, you're so right. People they don't necessarily listen. They are just waiting for a pause from you so that they can then continue to advance their own thoughts slash argument slash whatever. There's a wonderful story that I'm going to paraphrase, and it's not entirely accurate, but I would say it's a great metaphor. There was I'll call her the wife of the prime minister in the UK, and she went to go and meet the two US candidates for the US presidency, the Republican and the Democrat. And the first dinner she went to the dinner with the first bloke, and she went back to her husband, the prime minister, and he said, "Darling, how was the dinner?" And she said, "Wow, it was fascinating. It's by far the most interesting man I've ever met. He was just unbelievable to listen to, and just the things that he has and the ideas, just remarkable, absolutely remarkable." So, oh, that's very good. Well done. So that she goes off to the following night and she meets with the second candidate, and she comes back and the prime minister says, "So, darling, how was the dinner with the second candidate?" And she said, "It was unbelievable. I felt like I was the most interesting person in the world." Yeah. And I mean, how powerful is that? Now you get a chance to vote. You get a chance to spend time with somebody. Who do you think's going to win that battle? The person who makes you feel interesting, or the person who is trying to project that I'm interesting, you should listen to me?
Sure.
And I mean, I just felt like that's such a powerful story, and it's so relevant to the art of listening, where if I'm listening to what you say, I'm hearing you. It makes you feel valued. It makes you feel like I've got Ruth, have something to invest in the world, and people are interested in what I have to say, and therefore get the best out of you. And then if we're on a team together and working together, or we're colleagues or whatever, I benefit too from you being at your best, right? And just
Yeah.
like you benefit from when I'm at my best. And that's how our teams work, and cohesiveness and all of that. So what skills are there, though, that we can develop to improve our listening? Like, how does one go? It's easy to say, okay, guys, we need to listen more, we need to master the art, and it's a great form of communication. But do you have any advice to people on how they can improve that part of their conversational ability?
Yes, so I actually want to go back to the days of primary school and high school because this is something I still do to this day. So I don't know if you remember in primary school and high school, we would have listening comprehension tests, and a teacher would say a story and then ask you a couple of questions based on that story, and you'd need to write your answers down. And I used to hate those back then because the teacher wouldn't repeat her point. She would just state the story once. You only had one opportunity to listen to it, and then you'd have to write your answers. And so what I do sometimes is, outside of work, outside of time with friends and family, sometimes I would actually listen to either a podcast or I would listen to a documentary playing in the background. And then afterwards, I'd actually write notes on things in that documentary that stood out for me, or what were the main themes or main points. And then as you go on doing that, and you actually actively take time to listen to whether it's a documentary or your favorite podcast and write some of the things that stood out to you, you will see over time just how good or bad your listening is. And I like doing this as a skill because it actually is an active thing. You're not doing it where you're in a conversation at work or you are listening to a presentation at work. You're actually setting aside the time to develop your listening. And so I found that that has helped me even to this day. Although it was something that I had to do as a compulsory task back in primary school and high school, it's something that I do now. And I found that it actually really does help. And I set aside, like, I do it once a week or once every 2 weeks. But if you are in any job or if you're a student, I would honestly recommend that you do it that way. After listening to a documentary or a podcast, write down your key takeaways and then see how you can write down even more. Or even as you listen, write down what has stood out for you. And that's how I found, and that's what I found to develop my own listening skills, because I'm in the comm space. And so I'm always having to listen often. You never truly arrive when it comes to communication. So you have to teach yourself. And I found that this is such an easy way to keep learning. You don't need a lot of tools to do it. You just need your ears and piece of paper and a pen and write down things that have stood out to you.
That's such a good piece of advice because it's so readily actionable. Anybody can start it and do it at any one time. And at the same
Mm,
time, if you don't actively work to develop that skill, you will eventually lose that skill. We've got like, think of something like spell check on Word
mm,
documents and so on. Like with you and I don't know how old you are, but we didn't have a spell check when I was in primary school and
mm.
even just the first bit of high school. So, you had to make an effort to try and understand spelling and to try and work out how to spell which word. But
Mm.
now it's autocorrect and off we go. And there's times when I'll like type a word out and I'll be like, man, is that how you spell that? Like it looks funny. But do you get that?
I do.
It's
I
like,
do, definitely.
yeah, like you look at a word and like, wow, is that really, that doesn't like read right. But it's because if you don't use it, then you lose it. And it's such
Mm.
an important point to take an active interest in trying to further develop that aspect of your skill set. What about moving back to communication in the workspace? There's many mediums that one uses to communicate effectively with clients, with other colleagues, etc. Email, WhatsApp, so on, even platforms like Slack. There's all these connective platforms where you can communicate online now through a network. How does that vary platform to platform, and what should people be mindful of when they start to communicate cross platforms?
So in the workplace, I'm going to speak about this from my point of view because I understand that in some workplaces there are different platforms for communication. But in an office setting, for example, your first point of communication is email. But unfortunately, because we have WhatsApp and different platforms, people explore others first and then end with email. But email will always be the favorite, the go to. Why? Because it's a paper trail. It's the form of communication that stands. Yes, you can do WhatsApp. Yes, you can text on other social media platforms. But I think people have lost respect over time for the boundaries that come with workplace communication. So, for example, when I started at my current job, I received a laptop. I was told this is your email address and we communicate via email. And yes, we have Teams as well. Anything outside of that, you need to use discretion. That shouldn't be your primary, WhatsApp shouldn't be your primary platform for communicating with colleagues. It should be email, as it was communicated to me when I started at this job. For somebody else, it might be WhatsApp. And then you told that that's your primary platform for communicating with your colleagues. But even if you're using WhatsApp as a primary platform, there are still office hours. You can't just be sending a text message to a colleague at 11 p.m., 1 a.m., and be expecting an answer at that point. So there is a lot of thought needed when it comes to communicating with your colleagues, understanding that they are human, but there are also boundaries in terms of your office hours and also how you communicate with them, because yes, it can be informal at times, but that respect still needs to remain. And so, yeah, gosh, we could go down a whole rabbit hole with this one because I feel so strongly about it.
Yeah. So I'll give you what it's like in my workspace. So I train people in the gym, and basically I communicate directly with them and vice versa, and we agree on times to
Mm.
train and so on. So I never ever use email unless it's somebody who's responding to me. I find my email address on the website, or they're emailing me in response to my newsletter. Then it's the next response is generally via email. If they leave me their cell number in the email, then I won't even respond to them on email. I'll go straight to WhatsApp from there. because we will invariably end up there.
Yeah.
Should they decide to come into the gym, so it's just easier in real time to be able to do that. So I'm predominantly almost exclusively WhatsApp, but that's just the nature of my work. If we were doing backwards and forwards on rescheduling a time that needs to happen here and then, um, it isn't functional. WhatsApp is a lot easier and you can communicate a lot better. Similarly, there are
Mm.
times when I think a voice note is better to send than an actual message. Because there's sometimes when there's not going to be a phone call, but there's a situation that requires a certain level of diplomacy. And if I leave it to a WhatsApp message or even an email, if I leave it to written, there's the possibility that it could be misconstrued and taken in the wrong tone. So I will then be very selective about when I use a voice note so that I can confidently convey the tone that's required to make sure that there isn't any misinterpretation or malice behind the message. So it's a very deliberate ploy of mine when communicating to people, depending on the nature of the conversation. Do you have anything to elaborate on as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, absolutely. And this actually comes back to tactful communication, for example. When you are communicating with humans, as I said at the start, humans are very complicated. We have our own set of emotions, and there's a certain way that we need to be communicating with each other constantly. And that is why it's so good if you're afforded the opportunity to learn the people that you are communicating with. For example, my manager at work, sometimes there are conversations that are better done over WhatsApp because, like you said, you need an answer here and now, you need something to be done. But even then, the principle of communication, it needs to be backed up by respect. I can't be communicating with my manager the way that I would text a friend, for example. There is that boundary and
Mm,
understanding that we are colleagues, there's respect. I cannot address him anyhow. And even if I'm able to send a voice note, there's a way that I need to address him. So if you were to listen to a voice note, I say my manager, read an email, I say my manager, or read a text, I say my manager. The communication there should be a thread for you to see that there is respect here. And so there is a way in which you have to, as a person, be self aware of how you are communicating with people. And sometimes people are not self aware. Sometimes people don't see that sending 10 emojis in a text is probably not appropriate with your manager, for example, or it might be appropriate with a friend. Some people just aren't aware enough to see the difference. And so I think that's a skill that we're constantly having to have. That's why tactful communication is important because it requires diplomacy, it requires emotional intelligence, but it also requires you to actually learn and understand the person you're communicating with. And then in turn, respecting the relationship you have with that person, respecting the environment that you operate in with that person. And that all of those things contribute to how you communicate with that person. So it's not a cut and dry thing. There's no one size fits all. It's like another layer of communication where you're having to learn a person, you're having to understand how to respect a person on any type of platform that you communicate with them on.
yeah, that's so true. That's so true. Starting communication from a fundamental basis of mutual respect, I think, is really starting things on the right foot. When you start to chat about friends, colleagues, and then how you might chat to them differently, it makes me think of something that we were speaking about off air, which was expectations. And the expectations you have, and then you then put on that person to respond in a mutually appropriate way. So, to give you an example, if I start to engage with you as a colleague on WhatsApp, and I really only engage with other people on WhatsApp that are my friends and family, and then I start to engage with you on that level, and then that's not reciprocated, then all of a sudden there's this room for misinterpretation of, oh well, Ruth doesn't what Ruth doesn't like me, and she, then you start to construct this internal narrative that this person has something against you, you know,
Mm.
which which becomes very open-ended. So I think that's where the lines can become quite blurred, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that when it comes to that, as once again, I'll keep making this point about how complicated we are as humans, because we also go and make our own narratives in our head. If you send me a text and you just say okay, in my head I'm going to think that, oh, okay, you don't really like me because you gave me a one word response. But I think as humans, we also need to manage our expectations, right? So if I'm going to be using WhatsApp and I communicate with friends, but I also communicate colleague, if a colleague doesn't respond to me in time, or they don't respond to me within a certain amount of time, then I shouldn't go and start a whole narrative in my brain. The first thing I need to do is I need to clarify with that person if they understood or read my message. So maybe they just need a nudge or a reminder. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of a sudden we're enemies now because you haven't replied to me or you took your time. Some people are just terrible over text. So always clarify, and that's the beauty of communication. It's me sending you a message and you clarifying by letting me know that you understood what I said, and then I'm then going to confirm with you that that's exactly what I said. That is all a conversation is. It's me sending a message, you responding, you clarifying whether you understood or not, and me confirming that that is what I had said to you. So that is the process we're always doing all the time when we communicate. And so if I communicate with you differently over WhatsApp and I find that you're not responding to me in the way I wanted you to as my colleague, then instead of building a whole narrative, it's better for me to clarify. Did you get my message, Clinton? Just checking. This is a reminder about the message I sent to you earlier. If I'm having no joy with that, I can always just pick up the phone and call you. But unfortunately, I don't know if it's because of our individualistic nature that we are picking up lately, but we don't like to clarify. We don't like to ask the person whether they understood what we said. We just take what they've said, or if they haven't replied to us in a manner that we expected them to, then we run off with a whole narrative about them. It's so easy to just say to the person you're talking to, did you get my message? Or did you understand what I said? Or here's a reminder, just a friendly reminder about the message I sent earlier. And you'd find that when we actually seek to clarify with the person we're talking to, we will have less expectations, and also we will stop building these narratives that our brains love to do when we don't get the response that we wanted to from that person.
Yeah, that's so true. So what about, let's play this out in a real world scenario. So I've got a client and they've been on holiday, for example. They've been out of action in the gym for a month. I follow up with them because I know that they're back in town. They've given me their dates. I know that they're back in town and they should be ready and able to resume training because there hasn't been anything otherwise stated. And then I follow up with that person. Hey, just checking in. When are you ready to resume training? What does your times look like? Let's say keep your original slots that you had prior to your holiday. And I send over the course of a couple of weeks, I send 2 messages or 3 messages, giving a few days in between an opportunity to respond. What happens in that instance? What's the best way to get the best possible outcome there if that person continues to not respond?
That's a really good question. So I would say that if it has been, for example, a week since you sent, let's say it's the second message you sent last week, you're on Thursday today, you still haven't heard, I would say pick up the phone and call them. I don't think it's wrong to call. It's up to them if they can't take your call or not. But I think that's the next phase you take it to, because you need a response in real time. A phone call is always best. If it's been over text and they haven't responded, then pick up the phone and call them. But also, there's a responsibility on you. I like the example you've given me because you said, you've sent a communication, you've waited a week, you've sent another message, and you still haven't had any joy. But also, there's a responsibility on you as the person sending the message to not have this expectation of, you've got like a training session scheduled for tomorrow, but then you're only sending a message like 2 hours before to check that, hey, I know you're back from holiday, just wanted to double check. Chances of you getting a response and sending a message that close to when you're supposed to have your training session, knowing in the back of your mind that your client just came back from holiday, they're probably still trying to get their bearings and all of that. That's, that's not going to work. But I'd say that, as you've said in your example now, you've given it time in between. I'd say the next thing to do would be to pick up the phone and call them. If they haven't replied to you, then the best thing is, after trying to get hold of them via a call, then I would suggest waiting about an hour or two and then sending a follow-up message that said, I try to give you a call, checking in, and then maybe just saying to them, let's reschedule, get back to me when you can. Of course, if they're still not communicating with you at that point onwards, then I think you need to administer some other ways of getting their attention.
Yes. Like find out the address and then just wait there outside their gate.
Pull up on there.
Yes. Hey, give me 10 squats. Come on. That's when I'm answering my calls. Yeah.
Make up for the time missed.
Yes, exactly. So, Ruth, tell me, why has this been such an important part of your life, communication? I mean, I know you have a background in law, but why have you decided that this is something that you personally would like to pursue?
So I've always had a passion for people, and I've had a passion for communication. And that was long before I even had decided that I wanted to work in communication. This was long before I even decided I want to study law. So even in high school, I would join the debating team. I would be in school plays. You're always using opportunities to involve myself in activities where you are forced to communicate with people. And so I've always loved communicating, and I've always loved people. And I think another thing is, when I started working in organizations, in corporates, I started to see that a lot of the time when people apply for jobs, you'd write in your CV that I'm a hard worker, I'm a team player, all of the standard things we all love to say. But one thing that I found that, I've never really come across it, is people writing down that they are tactful communicators. It is such a beautiful skill to have when you're able to communicate with people in a diplomatic way, when you're able to listen well. It's all encompassing. And so when I started Tactfully, the heart behind it was to create a platform where I'd help young people, young professionals, master the art of communicating well in the workplace, because that's missing. It goes beyond just sending an email. It goes beyond just attending a meeting. It goes beyond just pulling off a presentation. There are so many factors that affect our communication on a daily basis. And so it's being able to read between the lines, seeing how people's emotions change when you communicate. And that's what really got me passionate about communicating with people in a manner that makes them feel appreciated, seen, valued, and also for them to want to actually communicate with you as well. And because it's a standard daily skill, we have to communicate every day. You can't afford not to. So I found that something I'm passionate about is also something that is equally a need in everybody's life. And so that is why I've really loved getting into it. And that is why it's something that I've been pushing as a passion project of mine to help specifically young professionals.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And you spoke earlier about in that segment about emotions,
Mm.
and conflict is something that is also inevitable in communication. Sometimes there are disagreements where I just have a different set of values to you, and then we find ourselves clashing. Other times there are disagreements over misunderstandings through poor communication, and things get taken in the wrong way. What happens in those situations of conflict? Because we have a choice to make when somebody decides they'd like to engage in a form of conflict by talking in a certain way, by saying certain words, by using certain tones and body language. That there's an opportunity that a person has in terms of how they choose to respond. And are they going to exacerbate the conflict, or are they going to be able to de-escalate the conflict and then resolve it as to the best of our ability? Can you speak to conflict for a second for me, please?
So conflict is so interesting because are not in control of how a person is going to speak to you. And I think we just need to know that off the bat when it comes to conflict. The only thing you are in control of in a conflict is your reaction, your words, your responses, all you. It's all you. That is what you are in control of. And I think where people lose the plot is thinking that you need to control the entire situation. You need to control how that person will talk to you or will respond to you. And you lose sight of how you are speaking to that person, and you lose sight of how you are reacting. So you can never fully learn a person. You can never fully understand a person. But what you are definitely in control of is what you will say, how you will react. And I know it's very difficult because there are things that can trigger us, there are things that can set us off, because you can talk normally, like you and I can speak normally now, and you may say something that is offensive and it just sets me off. And I will want to have a go at you because I feel offended. You have ruffled my feathers and I need to let you know that. But you have a responsibility of how you will react and what you will say. And that is why when it comes to conflict, listening is so important. And a lot of the times, I think you even alluded to this earlier, that we don't really listen to understand. We listen because we want to respond. And in your listening to respond, sometimes you lose sight of what the person is trying to say. And even in conflict situations, there could be a situation where two things can be true at the same time. The person saying how they feel, they could be wrong, but maybe how you addressed that they were wrong is also wrong. So now you've got a situation where both of you are wrong. And it becomes less about who is correct, but more about trying to resolve it in an effective manner. And how you communicate is going to be the thing that determines how you will walk away from that situation. It's not to say that a person that you're in conflict with will be able to respect you at the end of it, will be able to walk away loving you, you'll get back to a great friendship. Sometimes that doesn't happen, and we need to be okay with that. But I think when it comes to conflict and communication, you need to look at what you are in control of. And in those situations, you are only ever in control of how you will respond, what you will say, your demeanor, your body language as well. So if you can keep control of those things, chances are you will be able to de-escalate the situation. How that other person reacts is not your responsibility. So it's really more about the responsibility you need to take in conflict, and trying to communicate in a manner that will also help you regulate yourself, especially in situations where you can see you cannot control the outcome.
Yeah, sound advice, especially when dealing with somebody in person when it's all happening in real time. What about when we perhaps get a snotty email and we have an opportunity to either get stuck into a war of words and respond quickly, or is it more favorable to when one is confronted with a sticky email like that and the emotions are riding high, to just go and take a breather, make a cup of tea, make a cup of coffee, go for a walk, have some time to think about it and wait for that immediate response to settle before you then strategize over how best to respond to an email that is perhaps not ideal?
Yes, absolutely. My golden rule is always just go and boil the kettle, even if you have no intention of making a cup of tea or coffee. But that time it takes for you to walk to the kettle, boil, wait for it to boil and finish, helps you to think about things. It helps you to regulate your emotions and try to get to the bottom of what that person actually meant. And also we have different coping mechanisms. Hey, I would say that be honest with yourself. If you know you want to fight a person because of a snotty email they've sent to you, pick up the phone and call a friend. Rather vent to your friend about, what you've just seen in the email, and let all your words come out with your friend. someone you trust, of course, and then after that, get back to emailing that person. I think we have seen many situations where people, especially on social media, don't think before they respond, and some have lost their jobs as a result. Some have even lost their families as a result of not just sitting with it, mulling over it, and then choosing to respond appropriately. So I would always say, first thing, boil the kettle. Even if you have no intention of making a cup of tea or coffee, boil it, let yourself simmer with those thoughts, call a friend if need be, and then respond. But even before you respond, it's always good to clarify, as I said, if you feel that that person was snotty towards you, you could reply to them and say, I'm not really understanding what you meant. I read it this way. Could you please clarify? So that you also have an opportunity to de-escalate before it gets even more serious. And then finally, use ChatGPT if you're just struggling to come up with a response to that snotty email. It has saved many.
Yes. I
Mm.
love that. I think it's a massive weapon to have in the arsenal as far as that's concerned. I listened to somebody, his name is Jefferson Fisher, also comes from a law background in America. And he, when speaking about conflict, especially in person, if somebody comes across quite strong and they've said something offensive, that one of the best ways to de-escalate the situation is when that person is finished, to say, did you mean for that to be disrespectful? To ask them if they meant for it to be disrespectful, because then now
Mm.
they have to, the ball's back in their court, and then 99 times out of 100, they will then do the de-escalation themselves, because I don't know many people that would be like, yes, I meant for that to be disrespectful and I hope you feel disrespected. It would be like, even if there was that initial intention, you've now pushed back to be like, this is how I've taken it. Am I right in assuming that you meant for this to be intentionally hurtful or disrespectful? And
Mm.
I'm also offering you the grace to de-escalate if you feel like you maybe acted out of emotion. And I just thought that was such a wonderful way of putting the ball in the other person's court again, whilst
Mm.
also letting them know that how they communicated was perhaps not okay.
Exactly. And that just speaks to what I said the process of communication really is about. Communication, simply put, is you're sharing information with somebody. So once you share information with that person responds based on what they've heard. You clarify whether that is exactly what you communicated. And that is the conversation. So just as you said now, you're giving the opportunity to the other person to clarify what they meant. And then the responsibility is no longer on you to decide, how did they mean this? What did they mean? Because you're not in their brain. And as you said, 9 times out of 10, they'll get back to you and clarify that, oh, I actually didn't mean it this way. And so you've had an opportunity there to de-escalate what would have been a hectic situation.
Yeah. Ruth, one of my favorite questions to all my guests is, have you changed your mind on anything recently?
Oh, yes, I have changed my mind on something recently.
Yes, let's hear it.
I need to filter this in my head first because there's a lot of things I've changed my mind on recently. I'd say that I'd say that I've changed my mind on what journalism in South Africa looks like recently.
Okay.
And let me explain what I mean by that. I've changed my mind about it recently because usually, well, in the past, we would rely on, our mainstream media to give us news and information about what's happening in our country and around the world. But I think with the rise of podcasters and independent news media, there's really been I've really respected and enjoyed the fact that we can get our news from almost anywhere. And you've got people that really bring forth amazing topics, dive into news in a more in-depth level. And so I've changed my mind on just the traditional mainstream media that we've had as being my only source of information, and just really been so much more open to people who have used their platforms to talk about things that are not only in the news, but things that bother us or affect us on a daily basis. So I've really enjoyed opening my mind up more to independent media. It's been really, really brilliant.
Wow, I love that answer. Very, very cool. And I tend to agree with you as well on that. And that's
Mm.
such a wonderful way to finish, Ruth. Where can people find you if they would like to get in touch and they want to find out more about tactful communication?
Thank you, Clinton. So, if you would like to get a hold of me, I have a website, tactfully.co, but there is a hyphen in that word. So, tact-fully.co. So, that's where you can find me. And there are resources and ebooks there that can help you with your communication. They're all free to access. Also on LinkedIn, I'm Ruth Mtembu. So I should be easy to find on LinkedIn. But yeah, you can drop me a message there. Also drop me a message on my website, and let's keep the conversation going about how to be better tactful communicators.
Thank you so much. Keep doing the good work that you're doing, and thank you once again for being on the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Clinton.
Hey everyone. A huge amount of work and effort goes into producing this podcast, whether it's from the research going into the episode, whether it's finding the guests coming to the location, or them being online, to producing the content, edited and putting it in a format that is conducive to your ears and your eyes. And it goes a really, really long way if you can just do me one thing in return for this free content: share it. Share it far and wide, and if you find an episode useful, send it to someone who might feel the same way. That's all. Thanks a million. See you next week.